LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the August 11th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like my show, because, as usual, I picked out the weekend's, well, in this case, the weekend's 12 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which it'd be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all tonight. I will start with a political comedy clip, and it's from Bill Maher, but actually this week the Bill Maher clip is actually the news. Let me get that up here. This is a tweet. Apparently, our president, Donald Trump, accidentally watched comedian Bill Maher, and wacko comedian Bill Maher's show, So Many Lies. He said patients in El Paso hospital didn't want to meet with me. Wrong. Had really great meetings with numerous patients. Parenthetically here, before I finish my dramatic reading of the tweet that references the clip from Bill Maher I'm going to show you, there's a Washington Post story. Apparently the 8 patients in the El Paso hospital all did not want to meet with Trump, but the numerous patients who did meet with him were 2 patients who had been discharged and then were brought back. One of whom I think is this baby that you'll see in a clip coming up, in a pretty horrible looking picture with the President and First Lady of the United States. Anyway, you can see that Donald Trump also complained about what Bill Maher said about him being on vacation, but didn't really talk about what he really joked about how's it different from him not being on vacation. And then there's all this false statements, 95% in taxes he's going to pay if Trump loses. Well, you saw the tweet yourself. And that leads me into my topic, which is Trump's narcissism, how everything's about him, and that's why he couldn't be the consoler-in-chief this week after the terrible shootings in both El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, even though he went and visited both those places. And that's going to be the main topic. I will have one clip at the end from the acting director of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan, who is one of the, the worst people are rising to the top as the Trump administration goes on. And this guy, he's the one who's famous for saying he could go into these immigrant detention centers and look a teenager in the eyes and tell they're going to become an MS-13 gang member just by the look in their eyes. That'll be the last clip. But all the rest of the clips are basically about Trump's narcissism. His racism also comes up because I will have Cory Booker clips, or a Cory Booker clip and a Bernie Sanders clip, talking about Trump's racist rhetoric. And when I show the Bernie Sanders clip, I will actually commit legal analysis. I will use my law degree, and I will use my U.S. Constitution and the First Amendment to talk about where is the line, where does someone get criminal responsibility for inciting violence. I kind of talked about that last week, the Brandenburg incitement standard. This week I hope to do a better job of that. But before I get to all that, I want to start with a couple Bill Maher clips, including the one you just saw. I think the main one you saw, you saw President Trump criticizing from Bill Maher's show, which I will talk to you a little more. This is from the monologue, by the way. Down in the video description, if you want to follow along on my own, this is the clip list I'm using. There's a link down in the video description of that. There's also a link down there to the entire Bill Maher monologue, free on YouTube, on the Real Time with Bill Maher YouTube channel, which includes the 2.5 minutes I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Well, the president is off for a well-earned 2-week vacation, which will be different from working how? They want you to know President will be available at all times if there is an emergency that needs to be made worse. He is completely But on that, we know. Well, we know now this pattern that we have always seen whenever there's a tragedy. It's all about how he's feeling, right? It's like, is he okay? This week, after the massacres, he attacked the media, Obama, Google, Sherrod Brown, the mayor of Dayton, Beto, California, Sleepy Joe. He's the only president who thinks consoler-in-chief means you console him. And also, he's a whiny little bitch. But seriously, Mr. President, don't console us. Really, we don't, I know, well-intended, don't console us. And mostly stay out of hospitals. We have seen what he does in these situations. Like, you know, he threw paper towels to hurricane victims. What's he do in a hospital? Throw Tylenol? I mean, these poor people, imagine waking up from surgery and standing over you is this grinning, gaseous blob and his scowling trophy wife. People are like, shit, I must have died and went to hell. Please. They're like, I'm in the hospital. I've had enough orange Jell-O. But of course, you can't tell him he's unpopular. His new press spokesman drank the Kool-Aid, said, oh yeah, Trump went to the hospital. They said they treated him like a rock star. Yeah, R. Kelly. None of the 8 patients in the El Paso hospital would agree to meet with Trump. Isn't that something? They were all asked, would you like to meet the president? And they all said, El Paso.
So that actually, I like that last El Paso joke. I like the orange Jell-O joke. I like the R. Kelly joke. There were actually a string of good jokes in there. And they weren't just good jokes, but apparently they were news because our president, Donald Trump, I think his commentary was mostly directed at those jokes you just saw. There was that consoler-in-chief joke there, which actually it made me think that he really should have done like a Yakov-Smirnoff joke there, like in Soviet Russia, consoler-in-chief consoled by you, or whatever. It's not really a good Yakov-Smirnoff impression, but it does show how like everything is about Trump, and a lot of people have said he's a narcissist, which isn't that big a deal because pretty much anyone who runs for president has got to be a narcissist. That's like a fairly minor personality disorder as things go. But you'll see, I'm going to show you a clip that isn't available on YouTube. It's much shorter. This is like about 1 minute and 40 seconds where Bill Maher summarizes something he did earlier about Trump being a malignant narcissist. And that's much more serious. It means you have like narcissism and antisocial personality disorder and violence, or there are like a couple other things that are really nasty that make it much more dangerous than just your run-of-the-mill person narcissism. And, you know, honestly, I don't think that Bill Maher is qualified to give this diagnosis to the president. In fact, I think there's anyone who is qualified to diagnose someone wouldn't do it without actually sitting down and talking to them personally, wouldn't do it. But on the other hand, there's something to Trump being out of control and egotistical and a liar, like a pathological liar. And there's some question as to whether he's a racist, or whether he plays one on TV, and that's something I'll talk about a little more later. But I want to show this clip of Bill Maher talking about malignant narcissism, and that's also, of course, where I got the title of my video, the Trump Narcissism, which I also got it from the way Trump acted in the last week, which I'll talk about a little more with you after you watch that clip together over here.
As long as we're talking about mental health, I must say about Trump, now we did an editorial here a little while ago that said the narcissism. I know everybody talks about it, but they talk about it like it's a quirk. And what I was saying was, it's not a quirk. malignant narcissistic personality disorder. It's a real thing. If he was a schizophrenic or bipolar, we would take it much more seriously. And unfortunately, it makes him a great politician because he can do what politicians, what they need to do, talk out of two sides of his mouth. I think we can bring, this is what I said this way, I think we can bring up big background checks like we've never had before. Next day, the NRA's very strong views will be represented and respected in Congress, like they're not. Last year when there was the shooting, he said, remember this? They had that big conclave. He said, I like taking the guns early. Take the guns first, go through due process second. And the way the right wing just pretends he never said it, because the expectations for this mental patient are so low. Joe Biden says one little thing, and it's like, oh my God, Biden's senile. And this guy, I saw him on the lawn today, frothing and spitting and sweating and like pacing like a caged animal and lying and going off his head on a million different things, and that's okay, because the bar is nowhere for him. This is one of our big disadvantages.
Can I say more? What about
your...
And you saw where I ended that clip. Anthony Scaramucci, the mooch himself, was on Real Time with Bill Maher, and that perhaps that is why the President of the United States accidentally ended up watching it. I don't think I don't really, if Donald Trump told me the sky is blue, I would look out the window before I was sure, as they say, right? But the reason he may have been watching Real Time this week, if he doesn't watch it every week, is because Scaramucci was on, and actually in a Trump tweet I didn't take a screenshot of, he actually attacked Anthony Scaramucci. I was like, it seemed like all day today, like every half hour or so, there was like another couple tweets from, I don't know what's going on with our president. Whatever it is, I don't think it's good. And if you want to see some of the really bad things he did when he wasn't consoler-in-chief, not from the news that was made from political comedy, but from the actual news, I'm going to start with the longest, best news summary, as usual, from NBC News' Meet the Press. Chuck Todd here doing over 4 minutes. If you're following along on my clip list, this is clip number 3. And you'll see Chuck Todd talking about how we're like grappling as a nation with these terrible shootings, and it's like a raw open wound, but we need a consoler-in-chief, and it's not Trump because he's just behaving badly. And then there's some talk about the gun laws and white supremacy, and that's all just the introduction. As you know, if you watch the show regularly, Chuck Todd does his like introductory summary that sort of updates what's been happening since they filmed their big video package sometime in the last few days. And then they go and then they transition over to the package that, of course, they've re-edited to be most up to date. And I will talk about the NBC News Meet the Press Wonder Package News Summary after we watch it together over here.
As the country struggles to process the events of the last weekend, as we grapple once again with our gun culture, this wound feels deeper and a bit rawer. It was a week that the country needed a president to do what presidents have done in the past, to provide solace and healing, and to remind us all that the American story travels on that arc of history that bends toward justice. Instead, President Trump delivered a teleprompter message of unity on Monday and then spent most of the rest of the week attacking his perceived political foes, calling Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley's news conference a fraud, saying Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro makes a fool of himself every time he opens his mouth, and telling Beto O'Rourke of El Paso, Texas, to, quote, be quiet. Even comparing his crowd size to Beto O'Rourke's during a visit to an El Paso hospital. Democrats, in turn, ramped up their rhetoric, blaming the president, and many calling him a white supremacist. 6.5 years after Newtown and 2 years after Charlottesville, what does happen now? Will a bill strengthening background checks gain momentum? Or will we see the predictable wash, rinse, repeat cycle of inaction or gridlock on the issue of guns play out again? Will the Trump administration surprise its critics and fully engage in addressing domestic terrorism, particularly its links to white supremacist ideology? Or will that problem continue to fester? Just this week, from Las Vegas to Toledo, Ohio to Winter Park, Florida, arrests were made after domestic terror threats. As the threat rises, only a president can lead the conversation. The problem? This president, who has wielded the politics of race as a political cudgel, is stoking it.
We need meaningful background checks so that sick people don't get guns.
President Trump, under political pressure after mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, is promising new gun regulations.
We'll see where the NRA will be, but we have to have meaningful background checks.
It's a message that may sound familiar. After Las Vegas,
We'll be talking about gun laws as time goes by.
after Parkland,
We'll be doing the background checks.
in the end, the president and Senate Republicans failed to support background check legislation.
Why is now different?
Time goes by. I don't think I'm different, but I think the Senate is different. I think other people in the House are different.
But a spokesman for Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said he has not yet endorsed any legislation. That's after pushback for these comments Thursday.
But what we can't do is fail to pass something, by just locking up and failing to pass. That's unacceptable.
The only thing a new law would do would drive a wedge between Trump and his voters and the NRA.
Red flag laws, which identify extreme risk individuals and empower family and law enforcement to intervene to temporarily remove their guns, have broad public support. And 89% of Americans, including 84% of Republicans, support background checks at gun shows or other private sales.
President Trump wants to have everything both ways. He wants to say, oh, yes, I could support changes on gun safety, and then say, but let's all be sure to bow to the NRA.
Democrats are also raising their rhetoric on the president, blaming him for stoking hatred.
This is white nationalism. This is white supremacy.
He is a big hit with white supremacists.
Is the president a white supremacist?
He is.
I think it's a disgrace, and I think it shows how desperate the Democrats are.
Democrats point to Mr. Trump's rhetoric in the months before the El Paso shooter targeted Latinos, killing 22 people.
It is an invasion. You know that.
I call it invasion.
It's an invasion. An invasion. 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 Invasion.
On Wednesday, the same day President Trump visited El Paso, ICE raided 7 food processing plants in Mississippi, arresting about 680 undocumented workers.
I need my dad for me. My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal.
But federal authorities have yet to announce charges against the companies themselves.
This serves as a very good deterrent. If people come into our country illegally, they're going out.
And joining me now is the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan. Secretary McAleenan, welcome to the
And I actually didn't take a clip of Kevin McAleenan, the acting Director of Homeland Security. I have the acting Commissioner of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and he will be saying some similar things to what Kevin McAleenan said. I do have a clip from Meet the Press later, but that is... that's actually a clip of Kamala Harris. I have Kamala Harris, I have Bernie Sanders, I have Cory Booker of the presidential candidates, and then for Trump administration, I have that Mark Morgan guy from Customs and Border Protection. I have Kellyanne Conway with Bill Hemmer, who's in for Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. But before I get to all those newsmakers, I do want to show you a couple more news summaries that are not as good as the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, which I think after you watch it, you got to agree with me. There was like so much context, like all the different things Trump said after different shootings about, background checks, and then what happened, nothing. All the stuff that they said they were going to do and never did, and all the, Trump saying invasion, the juxtaposition of the shooting targeted at Mexicans in El Paso with the ICE raids in Mississippi, and that's one of the things that I'll have Mark Morgan talking about in that final clip clip 12 if you're following along. But anyway, that was like an awesome news summary. Oh, and there's even a clip of that girl crying about her dad being taken away. What was her name? Magdalena. That was like heartbreaking. And that's another thing that I'm going to show. That's why I chose the Mark Morgan clip, because he's like really callous about that. Like, oh yeah, I know why you showed that, because you want to like make people feel bad. Or that's not a direct quote. You'll see the direct quote if you stay tuned for the final clip. But unlike the Meet the Press news summary, these next three news summaries from CNN, ABC, and Fox News are not as good, not all that context, not all the bad behavior from the president put in the context of what he's been saying over a long period of time. They actually focus much more on the alleged suicide of Jeffrey Epstein in federal custody in New York. Jake Tapper starts off his State of the Union saying our State of the Union this week is appalled, which happens to be the same word that Bill Barr, who is supposed to be the Attorney General of the United States, but is really kind of like Trump's Roy Cohn at the head of the Justice Department. He's the person who was in charge ultimately of the federal prison where Jeffrey Epstein was, and committed suicide after apparently being on suicide watch and being let off suicide. Anyway, the next three clips are going to really focus on Jeffrey Epstein, which is a story, but is it more important than all that information you just saw? I mean, on NBC News' Meet the Press? I don't think so. I don't know why. CNN talks, they all talk about how it was a packed news week, and they talk a little bit about some of the material you saw in the Meet the Press news summary, but the next three news summaries are increasingly focused on Jeffrey Epstein, probably too much, in my opinion, which I'll discuss a little more after we watch Jake Tapper explain why the State of the Union this week is appalled in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is appalled. We begin this morning with a retweet from the President of the United States. Not a message about healing or uniting the country 1 week after two horrifying massacres. Not about the victims of those tragedies. Instead, President Trump using his massive Twitter platform, 63 million followers, to spread a deranged conspiracy theory, tying the death of pedophile Jeffrey Epstein in prison to the president's former political rivals, the Clintons. I'm not going to show you the tweet, but the spokesman for former President Bill Clinton responded to the president retweeting it, saying, quote, "Ridiculous and of course not true, and Donald Trump knows it. Has he triggered the 25th Amendment yet?" President Trump could use his megaphone for anything, but the president often uses it to amplify that which is the worst of us: personal attacks, bigotry, and insane conspiracy theories. Officials say Epstein died by apparent suicide while in the custody of the federal government. The Attorney General, William Barr, released a statement opening an investigation into how this happened, saying he was, quote, appalled, and saying Mr. Epstein's death raises serious questions that must be answered, unquote. This is, of course, not the first time that President Trump has chosen to use his amplified voice to spread conspiracies. He lied about President Obama's birthplace. He suggested Ted Cruz's father might have been involved in the JFK assassination. He lied that he saw American Muslims in New Jersey on TV celebrating 9/11 when there is no such tape. President Trump has also given voice to the lie that the migrant and refugee crisis at the southern border of the U.S. is a plot by Jewish billionaire George Soros to fund a, quote, invasion. That's a conspiracy theory that was the motive for mass slaughter in Pittsburgh and El Paso. This is no longer just irresponsible and indecent. It's dangerous. Joining me now from his hometown of El Paso after having canceled his campaign.
And I actually do have a Beto O'Rourke clip. I forgot to mention that when I talked about Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Bernie Sanders. I actually do have a Beto O'Rourke clip coming up in there somewhere. I believe that's clip number 8. And at least the CNN State of the Union clip there did have some context where they talked about other conspiracy theories that Trump has spread, and the way he's like spread racist conspiracy theories about Mexicans that, and the whole like sort of referencing the replacement theory and all of that. But the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, admittedly much shorter, only 30 seconds or 32 seconds, I guess, but all, packed news week, and we're only going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. It's not the only thing they talked about on ABC, but I don't know why this was such like a big lead story, even though it's, it's a story. I said it was a story, but is it the only story for if your name of your show is This Week and you're supposed to be talking about everything that happened this week and this is how you summarize the news? I don't think so, but you can let me know what you think after we watch George Stephanopoulos introducing This Week on This Week with George Stephanopoulos this week over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It has been a week packed with news, punctuated by the shocking revelation that Jeffrey Epstein, facing the prospect of life in prison on sex trafficking charges, was found dead in his jail cell from an apparent suicide on Saturday. The death has sparked outrage from his accusers, raised questions about how this could happen in a maximum security federal prison. It has also spawned a series of conspiracy theories online, some now circulated remarkably, if not surprisingly, by the president himself. Our Chief Justice Correspondent, Pierre Thomas, tracking all the latest developments. And Pierre, as I pointed out, this is
So, anyway, I think I said This Week enough before I showed the clip, and I sort of pre-criticized the clip as to the focus of the coverage. This next clip, the final news summary clip, is from Fox News Sunday, where Bill Hemmer is in for Chris Wallace. I've never really had a lot of respect for Bill Hemmer as a journalist, as a interviewer. I don't think he does a great job cross-examining Kellyanne Conway in the clip after next I'm going to show you. But one of the reasons I show these news summaries, in addition to the newsmaker clips that I show, is because the newsmakers actually watch these news summaries most of the time before they're interviewed, and you'll see Kellyanne Conway actually refers to this news summary where it's at one level you have to give Fox News and Fox News Sunday credit for showing how Trump retweeted this conspiracy theory, and in a way they're saying, oh, we're so shocked he's retweeting this conspiracy theory. But unlike Jake Tapper, you noticed on CNN State of the Union, he knows that if you really show it and the whole content, in a way you're actually helping spread the conspiracy theory, which Fox News is, I don't know, is it intentionally doing or just negligently doing? Or they spend a lot, you'll see in the next two clips, they show the conspiracy theory that the Clintons are responsible for the death of Jeffrey Epstein. They show it in both of the next two clips. And then you'll see on the Fox News summary, Kellyanne Conway doesn't mention who the powerful people who might be involved are. But in the news summary you're about to see, it's Kristin Fisher is also the reporter who does the news summary after Bill Hemmer does the introduction. And they talk about powerful people who were just named in Jeffrey Epstein files that were opened by a court yesterday, and now it's the day before yesterday. I think it was Friday. And they say, I think it's Bill Richardson and George Mitchell, and they show their pictures. You'll see in this news summary. I mean, if you don't want to spread the conspiracy theory and you don't want to smear people, then don't really focus on the conspiracy theory and put people's pictures up as your anyway. I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the 2.5-minute news summary from Fox News Sunday. Obviously, the worst of the 4 news summaries I'm showing you over here.
Again from Fox News in Washington, it's been a busy August recess so far for the president and for members of Congress. The nation's political leaders facing calls to do something in the wake of last weekend's mass shootings in El Paso and Dayton, Ohio. But the politics of gun control are complicated, and the stakes are even higher heading into the election of 2020. We will get to all of that in a moment when we speak exclusively with White House counselor Kellyanne Conway. But first, the stunning news of Jeffrey Epstein, the rich and politically connected financier, found dead in his jail cell this weekend. Kristin Fisher has the latest on that here in Washington. Kristin.
Bill, the Department of Justice says Jeffrey Epstein died of an apparent suicide, but several politicians, including President Trump, are floating unsubstantiated conspiracy theories that Epstein was killed or at least had help. Just hours after Jeffrey Epstein was found dead inside his New York jail cell, President Trump retweeted a post implying former President Bill Clinton was linked to Epstein's death with the hashtag Clinton body count. The post also referenced a Trump body count hashtag that was trending as well. The president and former president knew Epstein and had flown on his private planes, but both deny any knowledge of Epstein's alleged international sex trafficking ring involving underage girls. Prosecutors say the case will continue despite Epstein's death, while an attorney for Epstein's accusers says his clients are shocked.
We find it very hard to believe that he would be allowed to commit suicide, especially when he was on suicide watch from just a few days ago.
Epstein's death comes less than 24 hours after court documents were unsealed implicating several powerful men, including former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, and Britain's Prince Andrew. Attorney General Bill Barr says he was appalled by Epstein's death and that it raises serious questions that must be answered. A furious Republican Senator Ben Sasse told Barr that Epstein, quote, should have been locked in a padded room under unbroken 24/7 constant surveillance. Obviously, heads must roll. The FBI and the Justice Department's Inspector General are now investigating, but will the public believe whatever those investigations dig up with this many conspiracy theories being floated by people as prominent as the President of the United States? Bill?
What a story, Kristin. Thank you here in Washington. Joining us now, Counsel to the President, Kellyanne Conway.
And Kellyanne Conway, that's actually the next clip I'm going to show for those people who don't like to watch her. I have to tell you the next clip is not as long as most Kellyanne Conway clips that I show you. It's only, I think it's 2 minutes, 10 seconds because Bill Hemmer's cross-examination is incredibly weak. Bill Hemmer is, Fox News stooge. Is that too harsh? I think, as you know, I've been watching Fox News for a really, really long time. I've been on YouTube for like a dozen years, and for like the first half of that time, I didn't do these live clip roundups. I did Fox News bias videos mostly, and based on that long experience, the one positive thing I could say about Bill Hemmer is I think he's like doing his part to fight sexism by making the term bimbo a gender-neutral term. Did you just hear Sandy moan when I said that? But sorry, that was kind of a bad joke, and I apologize for the bad joke. But that's something I thought about Bill Hemmer for a while. But you'll see his... he does kind of what I said before I showed the Fox News Sunday news summary there, where they're like shocked that Trump is retweeting this conspiracy theory, but they're going to really show it and talk about it for a long time. And they show it again in the questioning of Kellyanne Conway, which is somewhat confrontational. To ask Kellyanne Conway about the president retweeting a conspiracy theory, but then he just lets Kellyanne talk about how Trump wants to investigate everything, and his follow-up is not that incisive. I think it's something like, but we know what he means when he's retweeting the Clinton killed Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy theory, but rigorous cross-examination, I think not, and you can let me know what you think after you watch this 2-minute, 10-second sort of cross-examination of Kellyanne Conway by Bill Hemmer on Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
Why did the president then retweet that Clinton suggestion?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated, as your reporter just revealed just the day before. There was some unsealed information implicating some people very high up. And I'm not going to repeat their names. You already did that. I'm not saying anything beyond that, and I won't. But I will say, Bill, that there's always this rush to, we need transparency, we need accountability when it involves fictional accusations like collusion with Russia to swing an election. This seems to be very concrete in that Jeffrey Epstein has done some very bad things over a number of years. And so let's continue to investigate that. I don't think that somebody's crimes and the accountability for that necessarily perishes with them. We know that the law can allow for many different investigations. Maybe there are co-conspirators, maybe there are not. But again, it's an active investigation. I think everybody should be at least relieved when an attorney general takes the action swiftly, as Attorney General Barr did yesterday.
Okay, let's see where that goes.
He's disturbed by this death, and let's see where it goes. It's really new. This all happened within the last 24 to 28 hours.
Understood. And we should go slow with this. Just back on the retweet quickly. It's clear what he was trying to say, wasn't it?
I think the president just wants everything to be investigated. And, trying to connect the president to this monster from years ago, where they're seen dancing in a video, versus other people who were actively, I suppose, flying around with this monster on his island, which was known as Pedophilia Island. Perhaps there's a public interest in knowing more about that. But again, this is all speculative, and it's not for me to go further than where the DOJ and FBI are right now. But you do hear different people asking questions, and they want to know who else was involved in Epstein's crimes, or even just activities. And I guess that will be revealed in time.
Okay, let's move to guns in America. What a week it was.
Yeah, let's move to guns in America, because he nailed that cross-examination of Kellyanne Conway. Didn't Bill Hemmer nail that? No, I don't think he did. I thought that was pretty weak, as I described before. I showed the clip, and it's almost like they were working together to how many times can they show the retweet that Fox News is so shocked that Trump retweeted the conspiracy theory about the Clintons, and you heard Kellyanne Conway refer to the news summary in the previous clip, like I said, and it's like somehow Fox News and the Trump administration are in collusion and not actually separate entities, with one being the government and one being a journalistic entity questioning that governmental entity. And I don't know, maybe I've just been wrong way. I've been watching The Loudest Voice in the Room on Showtime, and I read this book, The Loudest Voice in the Room, that is sort of, I don't know, you can't see the whole title, but Fox News is not really a news organization. If you've been following, like I said, for the last 12 years on my channel, it's pretty clear that Fox News is a partisan political organization to support the Republican Party and now the Trump Republican Party. But anyway, I think that was pretty evident from the Fox News Sunday clips I showed with Bill Hemmer, Kristin Fisher, and Kellyanne Conway. And now I want to get to some of the Democratic candidates. The next 4 clips are Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker. And this next clip, I'm not really a big Beto O'Rourke fan. I mean, I think he does a good job of doing the presidential candidate version of the malignant narcissism argument you heard from Bill Maher earlier. You'll hear Beto O'Rourke say how Trump makes everything about himself. But actually what I like about this clip is the way that Jake Tapper takes 2 different things that Trump did in El Paso and puts them together, that makes the argument of Trump narcissism so much more strongly than anything Beto O'Rourke says in his answer, at least in my opinion. You can let me know your opinion after or while we watch this clip of Jake Tapper and Beto O'Rourke on CNN State of the Union this morning over here.
I do want to ask you about President Trump visiting El Paso, visiting the University Medical Center Hospital this week, which I know you visited as well. The president praised the doctors there, but in a cell phone video that has been made public, he also bragged about his last rally in El Paso in February, and he attacked you. Take a listen.
That was some crowd.
Thank you for
And we had twice the number outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
The president also took a photo I want to show with a 2-month-old baby. The parents of that child had died trying to save the baby. The President Trump in that picture with this now orphaned child. Big smile, thumbs up. What did the people of El Paso tell you about the president's visit? Did he offer them any comfort?
The people of El Paso told me that they didn't want to see the president and they didn't want him to come here. They understand that he's part of the problem. His constant warnings of invasions and infestations, his description of El Paso as one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. And he didn't say it once, he said it repeatedly, though we are one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America, helped to cause somebody to drive more than 600 miles to kill people in this community. Not a single patient at University Medical Center or at Del Sol Hospital, the two hospitals caring for survivors of that attack, wanted to see the president. That says it all, if you ask me. But for him then to focus on comparing political rallies or on himself or on how much people love him just shows you how sick this guy is and how unfit for this office. He should be consoling people, bringing people together, focusing on their pain and improving their lives. And instead, he's focused on himself.
Let's talk about some of the solutions that you
focused on himself, which brings us back to the title of my Sunday live clip roundup this week, Trump's narcissism, because that's the big problem with Donald Trump, is his focus on himself, and that being the main focus of the Trump presidency in so many different ways. But like I said, not a big Beto O'Rourke fan, but I did appreciate the way Jake Tapper set up that question with both Trump's I mean, how often can we be shocked by Donald Trump? But when that clip came out of him discussing his crowd size in the hospital, I mean, and then that picture with the baby, that the orphan baby brought back to the hospital by family members, I guess. Maybe they're Trump supporters, I don't know. But the thumbs up picture with the baby and Melania Trump. I mean, that's grotesque, in my opinion. Grotesque, in my opinion. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. And like I said, not a Beto O'Rourke fan. I did vote for Bernie Sanders in the California primary back in 2016, which I've talked about before, although I ended up voting for Hillary Clinton in the general election. So I happen to be one of the people who voted for Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, but not Donald Trump. I don't know who voted for Donald Trump, why they voted for Donald Trump. When I get to the Cory Booker clip and maybe the Kamala Harris clip a little bit, I'll talk about whether people who voted for Trump are racist and whether we should say they're racist, because that's sort of a topic that comes up later. But this clip with Bernie Sanders is whether Trump is responsible for the crazy people who shoot immigrants after Trump creates a climate that is anti-immigrant. And this is where I promised I would commit legal analysis. I would talk about the First Amendment. I have my copy of the U.S. Constitution here, and I will describe the Brandenburg incitement standard. And I won't do it now. I'll do it after I show the Bernie Sanders clip. But to follow my analysis, pay attention to what he says about what's Donald Trump's intent, which is also something he talked about last week in a clip I showed on the Sunday live clip roundup last week. But here he is with Margaret Brennan talking about, I didn't take a clip from Steve Scalise, who was shot playing baseball by apparently a left-wing Bernie Sanders supporter. And I did show last week how people were using that, we don't blame Bernie Sanders for shooting Steve Scalise at that baseball game, so we shouldn't blame Donald Trump for the El Paso shooting. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous, because Bernie Sanders didn't spend the last couple years saying that baseball is responsible for rape and criminality and invading the United States, and that's why the guy attacked baseball. But that's kind of what Trump did with Mexican immigrants. But I'm not showing the Steve Scalise clip, but here is Bernie Sanders responding to Steve Scalise and asking with Margaret Brennan, and then Margaret Brennan asking about whether Trump is responsible for the shooting in El Paso, and I will do some First Amendment legal analysis after Bernie Sanders' answer on CBS's Face the Nation this morning that we watched together over here.
I want to give you a chance to respond to Congressman Scalise, who brought up the fact that the man who shot him back in 2017 had been a volunteer for your campaign. He said he doesn't blame you, and therefore, by the same token, no one should blame President Trump for the shootings that we've seen in the past few days. How do you respond?
Look, as soon as I possibly could, I was on the floor of the Senate condemning that action. What we are is a nonviolent political movement. I condemn all forms of violence. You know, we had 13 million people voting for us, and I'm afraid I can't just tell you that every one of them is the kind of person that I would like. But we must bring about the fundamental changes that this country requires in healthcare and education and climate change. We do it in an absolutely nonviolent way.
But do you believe, and in some of your language in recent days, you've said President Trump is a racist, you've called him a xenophobe. Do you believe he is directly or indirectly responsible for what happened in El Paso?
Look, President Trump and nobody else wants to see people mowed down and killed, and I've never said that. He does not want to see that. But I think what he has created in this country with his incredible rhetoric, his racist rhetoric, where he calls Mexicans rapists and criminals, where he almost condones when in a rally, when somebody was attacking somebody, he said, I'll pay the legal bills for violence. I think he creates a climate where we are seeing a significant increase in hate crimes in this country, hate crimes against Muslims, against Mexicans, against Jews. He is creating the kind of divisiveness in this nation that is the last thing that we should be doing. So he creates the climate. But do I think that he wants to see somebody get shot? Absolutely not.
Do you expect that...
So he creates the climate, but he doesn't want to see anyone get shot, is what Bernie Sanders says. And for someone to be criminally responsible for inciting violence... there's this case, Brandenburg versus the United States, interpreting the First Amendment. If you have your ACLU Constitution, or any Constitution, you can look at your First Amendment, which will tell you that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech. Well, what does that mean? How much can you incite violence before you can be punished criminally? Well, the 1969 case of Brandenburg versus the United States was actually about a member of the KKK who was inciting violence. And what the Supreme Court held was that you can't be criminally responsible for violence committed based on what you said unless two things. You have to intend to incite imminent means about to happen, imminent lawless action, so you have to intend it, and what you said has to be likely to produce that imminent lawless action. So that's the Brandenburg standard. You can't be criminally responsible unless you meet both those things, that you intend to cause the imminent lawless action and that you're likely to cause the imminent lawless action. Whether what Trump says is likely to cause the imminent lawless action, that's kind of debatable. Bernie Sanders is saying there that he does sort of create this climate, but Bernie Sanders said the first thing, he doesn't intend for people to shoot up, El Paso, the mall in El Paso. That's not Trump's intent. He doesn't intend to cause that imminent lawless action. And if that's true, and last week I said, I don't know, is Bernie Sanders giving him too much of the benefit of the doubt? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But if that's true, then Bernie Sanders is saying, under the Brandenburg 1969 U.S. Supreme Court standard, not criminally liable if he didn't intend to incite the imminent lawless action. Now, whether that's true, whether that should be the standard, I'm just telling you that's what the legal standard is. Now, the next two clips, I'm not going to give you a deep legal analysis of, but it's about whether Trump is a white supremacist. And it's also that issue I was talking about earlier as to whether we want to label the people who vote for Trump as racist, especially in the Cory Booker clip. But the Kamala Harris clip starts first, and she's actually taking more of a centrist position, and you'll see she doesn't really call Trump white supremacist. I think white nationalist is better, and that he thinks that the United States should be a white nation, and anyone who's not white, they're like guests here, and if they're not behaving themselves, then they should go back where they came from, even if they were like born here, which, of course, if you look at your U.S. Constitution, the 14th Amendment, if you're born here, you're a citizen. But apparently not in Trump world if you're a white nationalist. But Kamala Harris talks about whether he's a white supremacist, doesn't really say that. See, the thing is, some people say that Trump's not racist. He's just playing one on TV for political advantage. And what's the political advantage of saying things that are racist? Well, the theory is, and I don't know if this is true or not, you can let me know what you think down in the video or in the comment section. The theory is that if Trump does these racist things and all the people on the left call him racist, that's going to make his base, his voters, feel like they're being called racist. If you're calling Trump racist and I voted for Trump, then you're calling me racist, and I don't like that. I'm not racist. So you're attacking me, you're attacking Trump. I'm going to, we're going to all gather around our leader and unify because you're attacking us as racist and we're not racist. So the way you attack Trump as racist, you have to say, oh, you didn't know he was racist when you voted for him before, but he's showing it so much now that, and we know you're not racist, even though you voted for him. We know you are not racist, and you feel bad about this guy. You don't want to vote for him again because now you know. And that's kind of the gist, I think, of these next two clips, especially, well, I'll start off with Kamala Harris and talk. I've talked long enough, so I'll talk a little more after we watch 2 minutes of Kamala Harris talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press this morning, talking about Trump, whether it matters to label him a white supremacist, and, well, I'll talk about it more after we watch to get over here.
First ever appearance on Meet the Press, and I asked her if labeling the president a white supremacist matters.
I think it overlooks the fact of the truth about the history of our country and where we are, which is, we have to speak truth. Racism is real in this country. It was before he was elected. It will be after. Anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia. These issues are real in our country, and we have to speak truth about it. And certainly, we must point out and never condone anyone who uses their power in a way that fans it. But the reality is that these are forms of hate that are not new to our country, which have, in the history of our country, taken lethal proportion, and still today take on lethal proportion. And so I believe that the conversation has to be about how we are going to speak truth about the history and then address it. And, when I look at what's happening now, Chuck, just most recently, with the announcement of the raids from months ago, much less what happened in El Paso, to the most recent raids where hundreds of people were picked up. Many were released because they probably shouldn't have been picked up in the first place. People are afraid in our country.
Do you think Hispanics feel targeted right now?
I do.
That between El Paso and this ICE raid that took place in Mississippi?
And this president's rhetoric, which has been...
Can he say anything at this point to reassure Hispanic Americans?
I don't think it would be authentic if he did. And I think people are smart enough to know that. There's an old saying, judge me by my actions, not my words. And his actions have been to divide, to vilify, to to do what is contrary to who we are as Americans, which is to say it's us versus them, as opposed to a president who uses the power of that microphone in a way that is about unifying and lifting up as opposed to beating down. That's what this president does. He beats people down, and I will tell you that's the sign of a coward.
How do you...
Well, two things I don't like about Kamala Harris in that clip. One, she talked about, judge me by my actions, not my words. And then mostly what she talked about were Donald Trump's words, which is just a bad argument. But then, of course, the big problem I have with Kamala Harris as someone in California who remembers her record as a prosecutor in San Francisco and as Attorney General in California and not really being a fighter against mass incarceration, if you've read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which has been in this place of honor over my left shoulder for I think the whole last 6 years I've been doing this show, because it's such really an important component of my view of the problems with American society is the problems with mass incarceration described in this really seminal book. But Kamala Harris did not fight against that, and she says, judge my word or judge actions, not words. But now she's like trying to make nice words about mass incarceration. But I remember her actions here in California when she was a prosecutor and attorney general. And I'll vote for her over Donald Trump if she ends up being the nominee. And she's actually one of the top contenders. But she's certainly not my favorite for those reasons. And she's not someone who should be throwing around the term, judge my actions, not my words. And then especially when she follows it up with that weak argument that's about Trump's words. But anyway, I have one more presidential candidate clip to show you before I get to Mark Morgan, the really, well, what can I say, the evil head of evil acting head. Acting evil? Is he acting evil or is he actually evil? Acting evil head or evil acting head of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection? But before I get to that clip, I have Cory Booker. He actually isn't afraid to say that Trump is a white supremacist, but he's dealing with that issue I was talking about before about how do you deal with Trump voters without, you don't want to call the Trump voters racist when you're calling Trump racist, because otherwise they're going to unify around Trump. You want to say, oh, we know you're not racist. You don't want to vote for a racist. Now that you can see he's so racist, you're not going to vote for him. And Cory Booker's solution is, well, you're not racist. The problem is that you're not anti-racist. It's this weird double negative argument. That's the final clip on the main topic before I get to the immigration, ICE raids, horrific thing that happened in Mississippi, and Jake Tapper's pretty good cross-examination in the final clip. But here's Cory Booker talking to George Stephanopoulos about being not anti-racist over, and good reference to MLK Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham jail, although it almost sounds like Cory Booker saying that Martin Luther King is alive today and talking to him, but maybe I'm crazy about that part, which we'll talk about a little more after we watch that clip here.
Pay a price for that.
You say that gun control is part of the answer, also taking on the rhetoric of hate, and here's a part of how you talked about that this week.
Because if the answer to the question, do racism and white supremacy exist, is yes, then the real question isn't who is or isn't a racist, but who is and isn't doing something about it. There's no neutrality in this fight. You are either an agent of justice or you are contributing to the problem.
You made it pretty clear you think President Trump is on the wrong side of this fight. Does that hold for his supporters, too? And I guess my question is, how do you call out President Trump on the issue of white supremacy and racism without alienating his supporters?
Well, that's, I guess, really what I've been trying to say. This impotent simplicity of who is and who isn't a racist is really not the question. If we have racism in our country, and we are all in this together, and we believe that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, what are you doing about that injustice? It's not enough to say I'm not a racist in America. If racism exists, you need to be anti-racist. Same thing with anti-Semitism. I can't sit idly by if my Jewish brothers and sisters are facing that kind of violence and that kind of evil. We are all in this together.
So if someone
exist,
is supporting President Trump, they're not anti-racist?
No, I'm not saying that. And again, this is the kind of slicing and dicing that often tries to pit us against each other. If we have a nation where someone doesn't feel comfortable, where someone could be a victim of a violent attack, and remember, white supremacy and white supremacist attacks are on the rise. The majority of our terrorist attacks in this country since 9/11 have been right-wing extremist groups or white supremacist groups. And so if this kind of strains exist in our society, we all Americans should say, this is not who we are, and we have something to do about it. Remember, King said more eloquently to me, he said, what we have to repent for in this day and age is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, it's the appalling silence and inaction of the good people.
Does the government
That's
need more?
my point.
Does the government need more tools to take this on as well?
So yeah, King said to me, I guess he's really talking about how reading the letter from the Birmingham jail that King wrote said something to him. Not Martin Luther King Jr. actually said something to him that would be crazy. Cory Booker's not crazy, right? But anyway, is that like a good approach? You know, I'm not saying you're racist. I'm just saying that you're not anti-racist, and that's the problem. Or anyway, is that a way around the whole don't call Trump supporters racist? I mean, I don't think everyone who votes for Trump is racist, but that if you vote for Trump, it either means, I mean, there are some possibilities because Trump obviously has a long history of saying and doing racist things, going all the way back to the 1970s with like the housing development, and I've talked about this many, many times. So if you vote for Trump, it means you're either comfortable voting for a racist, ignorant you're voting for a racist, or like willfully ignorant that something, or I mean, I've heard people sometimes say that it's like people say we want to hurt the other people, the bad people, and help me. That's what I want from Trump. He's going to hurt the bad people, the other people, maybe the brown people, I don't know, the brown and black, the people of color. But he's going to help me, and Trump gets away with keeping his base because even though he doesn't really do anything to help, like the poor white people, he follows through on what he's saying about hurting the brown people. And that gives me the transition to this final clip, which is Jake Tapper cross-examining Mark Morgan, who's famous for saying he can look into the eyes of a teenager in immigration detention and just tell they're going to be an MS-13 gang member. Well, in this clip, he tries to answer for, you saw the clip earlier of the crying girl who ICE took her daddy away in Mississippi, Magdalena. Well, Mark Morgan tries to answer for that. He tries to answer for why the workers were targeted and not the employers. And Jake Tapper, Chuck Todd did a pretty good job of talking to Kevin McAleenan, the acting head of Department of Homeland Security, about this in a clip I didn't take. But Jake Tapper actually looked at data in the past and kind of nails him on that. And I cut about 30 seconds of this clip out where Mark Morgan is talking about the way the employers exploit the employees. And I only did that because I wanted to talk about the final part of this clip where he's like so callous about Magdalena, the crying girl, and how, of course you're going to show that because you want to like pull at the heartstrings of people. And the final thing I want to pre-criticize this clip, or actually laud this clip from Jake Tapper, is you'll see in the beginning, the first part of the answer that Mark Morgan gives, he claims these raids on workers in these chicken plants in Mississippi aren't raids, and explains why, and it's pretty ridiculous. And Jake Tapper like follows up, continuing to call them raids, and Mark Morgan doesn't even try to correct him. That's kind of one of my favorite parts of this final news clip that we'll watch together before the bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end, of course. But Here's 4 minutes, Jake Tapper showing, all that stuff that President Trump did this week is really distracting us from the real horror of horrors, and it's the immigration policy is amongst the top of that list, as you can see in the clip that I will talk about with you a little more from CNN's State of the Union this morning after we watch it together over here.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. President Trump is defending the immigration raids in Mississippi this week, in which at least 680 people were detained, leaving some children crying out for their parents. The president says those raids were a very good deterrent to those considering crossing into the U.S. illegally. Joining me now, the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Mark Morgan. Thank you so much for joining us. I want you to take a listen to one 11-year-old girl whose father was detained in these Mississippi raids.
I need my dad for me. My dad didn't do nothing. He's not a criminal. Governments, please put your heart. Let my parents be free with everybody else, please. Don't leave the child with cryness and everything.
Now, you and the president said just a few weeks ago that the pending ICE raids coming down the pike were going to be focused on violent criminals. That's not what happened here in Mississippi. Why not?
Well, so first of all, I've never said that the raids, as you call, were focused on violent criminals. I've never said that. And also, I think words matter. These aren't raids. These are targeted law enforcement operations. And in this case, this was a joint criminal investigation with ICE and the Department of Justice targeting worksite enforcement, meaning companies that knowingly and willfully hire illegal aliens so that in most cases they can pay them reduced wages, exploit them further for their bottom line. That's what this investigation was about, a criminal investigation, Jake.
All right, so I want to get to that in 1 second, but just to give your exact quote, and you're right, you didn't say violent. You said, quote, their part has always been and it will be to go after those that are criminal aliens, meaning those people that are here illegally and have committed additional crimes against American citizens.
So that was my response to a question about priorities. And the ICE's priorities will always be to go after criminal aliens as a priority. That doesn't mean they exclude all demographics. We still have to apply consequences, meaning enforce the rule of law for those individuals that are here illegally against immigration law.
So it seems like undocumented workers, the dad of that little girl and the like, often bear the brunt of these raids and not the employers who hire them. Isn't it important to hold businesses responsible for this? Researchers at Syracuse University found that from April 2018 to March 2019, the Trump administration prosecuted 0 companies and only 11 individuals for employing undocumented immigrants. Obviously, hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants have been targeted.
So think about what you're saying, Jake. So you're saying on one hand that we're not doing enough, and then when we go out and we actually do what you're saying we need to do more of, they're chastised for doing that.
Well, I'm saying, why aren't you focusing more on the companies and the business owners?
They are. Again, this was a joint criminal investigation between ICE and the Department of Justice, which was targeting the companies that were hiring illegal aliens.
Are there any charges against the companies or the business owners?
It's a pending investigation right now. There's a criminal search warrant to go in there to collect more information, more intelligence, and that investigation is ongoing. But that's the intent of that investigation. These individuals here, and the girl, I know it's emotional. I know it's done on purpose to show a picture like that.
What's done on purpose?
But to show the girl, Jake, listen.
Just people in the wake of these raids, we interview people who are affected by them.
But how about interview the people that, because a majority of time in these cases, these individuals that are here illegally, they also steal identities of U.S. citizens. They get fraudulent documents, social security cards, and et cetera. And so it's not just a victimless crime that's going on here. First of all, they are here illegally, and then a lot of times there's additional fraud that goes with this for them to try to get these jobs in these companies. So I understand that the girl's upset, and I get that. But her father committed a crime. And just so the American people know also, is that girl, her mother was home, and she was reunited with her mother within a few hours that night.
Oh, I thought children did better when they were raised by both a mother and father. Isn't that like a right-wing talking point? But she was reunited with her mother at least, right? Anyway, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip from Mark Morgan, and I think Jake Tapper did a great job following up there on the lack of employer prosecution. He did admit that he said that they were only going after violent criminals, or that Mark Morgan had never said that. So Jake Tapper even, did journalistically admitted his mistake, but followed up on still calling them raids, and I think did a good job. So much better than what you saw from Bill Hemmer. Jake Tapper versus Bill Hemmer, it's like journalist versus gender-neutral news bimbo, right? Isn't that what I saw people calling him a news bimbo, but anyway, down in the comment section, before I finish up, also down in the comment section, I noticed I did get one super chat contribution this week from Lulu Girl here. Actually, this is one of my newest shirts, but I think I've worn it at least one or two times before. It's not like totally new. I've definitely worn this shirt at least one time before. It's like the black shirt, but you can sort of see like there's what are those, like palm trees or something? I don't know. But anyway, sorry to throw you for a loop with a relatively new shirt. But I do appreciate those super chat contributions, because last week, for example, when I covered the El Paso and Dayton shooting, not only got demonetized by YouTube, but after a manual review, they decided, yep, can't monetize that, even though, of course, the news is monetized, the news channel up. Anyway, I don't want to really complain about that, but if you want to support my channel, there's those super chat contributions. YouTube takes, I think, like 30% of those. The Patreon patrons, those are very dependable, because even though people come and go, I can pretty much depend on like a monthly support, which is more than the ad revenue I get from YouTube. And when you add in the super chat contributions, it's still not quite as much as the Patreon contributions. And then actually, I think Patreon takes out like 11% instead of 30%. And then I think the least percentage is taken out by direct PayPal contributions. There's a link down in the video description for that. For PayPal and Patreon contributions at the $5 level, I send you this weather-resistant vinyl hashtag LiberalViewer sticker, and at the $10 level you get the sticker plus this ACLU Constitution I was waving around before. So I'm always happy to send those out. And before I finish, for the Dash and Sandy fans out there, I wanted to show that, Sandy, as usual, is lying down right there as my one live viewer. But before I started the show, she was lying down there and Dash was outside, and I took a video from, not where I am now, but sort of like facing where I am now from outside that door. And I am going to show you that very brief, it's very difficult to find a clip of Dash and Sandy interacting, so they don't really interact. It's sort of like two ships passing in the night very briefly over here. And sorry it's such a bad Dash and Sandy clip this week. It's been a really busy week. If you subscribe to my channel, you probably saw that I uploaded a video of the ACLU Sacramento Sheriff Oversight Community Forum that I helped organize on Friday, and the whole video is up on my channel if you are interested in that kind of thing. And that's what has been keeping me busy and away from YouTube and other things. Next week I will be back with another Sunday live clip roundup, but I'm going to be out of town. I put together all the things I need to actually broadcast the show out of town. I'm taking my daughter to college. If you've been following the show, you know that she graduated high school about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, and then did a gap year program. And anyway, I'm taking her to college, and I'll be out of town next week doing that, but I'll be in a rental, and so I can't guarantee what time it's all going to happen. There might be all sorts of snafus that I can't predict until I get where I'm going to be, but I am still going to do the Sunday live clip roundup, and I got different methods of getting the shows so that I can take the clips. And if you appreciate the time I spend every Sunday for the last 329 Sundays and next Sunday and for every Sunday for the foreseeable future, you can support my channel by giving me a thumbs up, positive comments, subscribing to the channel, or those financial methods that I talked about already. And until next week, or next time I make some sort of other kind of video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.